Hi everyone, I'm a local church leader in Lincoln at Alive Church and part of the Ground Level Network leadership as well.
Happy to go next. My name is Israel Olifinjana. I work with the Evangelical Alliance. I lead a network called One People Commission. Also a Baptist minister and do a lot of research and writing around African Christianity and African theology in Britain.
Dave Richards, lead St Paul's and St George's in Edinburgh. Used to be on the EA Council when we appointed you, but as soon as I heard you were coming, I left. And joke. I literally arrived back at midnight last night from Berlin, where I've been at a conference, but sadly our luggage didn't arrive back. So that's still in Amsterdam. So that's why I'm unshaven and a bit bleary-eyed this morning. But on the board for World Vision UK, as well as leading St Paul's and St George's in the centre of Edinburgh, where it is blue sky and sunshine, as it always is in Scotland.
I seem to remember it being 25 degrees down here last weekend and then 6 inches of rain in Scotland.
I don't care, I was in Berlin.
Hi everyone, I'm Krish Kandiah. I think in this call my hat is a ambassador for World Vision, but I also run a refugee charity called Sanctuary Foundation, and I am in the National Theatre. It's a long story, but it's lovely to see you.
My name is Matt Hyman. I'm the part of the church engagement team at World Vision UK. I was going to introduce you all, but you've all done it, so that looks like a better way to start. So I wanted to talk about decolonisation, if that's okay. I hope it is, because that's why you're all here. It's something that I just keep hearing all over the place at the moment. It seems to be people have described it as the main issue in international development. And so some of the theologians from World Vision, CAFOD, Christian Aid, Tear Fund and USPG are sitting around a table at the moment over the next few months working out what the theology of decolonisation means to the church. But I really wanted to talk about this in terms of how does it affect local churches in the UK, most of whom are already engaged with some kind of international development or mission work. What does this mean for us on a practical level? Krish, can you give us a bit of a definition of decolonisation?
Well, you have a global expert here on the call in Israel, so I think anything that I would say would be...
well, you go first and he can correct you.
Well, in my world, decolonisation it's an interesting word because it's quite a triggering word for some people. So some people see it as a form of kind of woke theology. They put it in a box. They think it's kind of left wing. Some people get very nervous and start talking about neo-Marxism, and so I'm not one that often uses it as a phrase, because I'm normally looking for common ground and rather than triggering words. But it refers to the fact that often when Western missionaries went to the rest of the world, they didn't just come with the good news of Jesus in a pure form. It was often wrapped in a cultural wrapper of Christianity. So, of Western Christianity. Let me say that. So, for example, the classic line is, we're going to Africa for Christ and for commerce, it was said. And I think this is an apocryphal story, but one kind of story around the kind of missionary world was, if we go to Africa, we'll sell more trouser presses. Well, why would you sell more trouser presses? Well, we'll go and we'll teach people about Jesus, and they'll want to read the Bible. And if they want to read the Bible, they're going to have to learn to read and write. If they learn to read and write, they're going to need pencils and pens. And if they need pencils and pens, they're going to need pockets to put the pencils and pens in. And if they need pockets, they need trousers. If they need trousers, they need trouser presses. And so this idea that taking the gospel also was a economic opportunity for the West, a power opportunity for the West, has led to this understanding of mission as colonization, of taking your culture and imposing it on another place. And so decolonization is just being mindful of that term. But as I say, in this current climate, in some circles, the church has become very nervous about culture war, or in other circles they've jumped into the culture war, and this is seen to be a culture war phrase. So I'll just talk about equality, about recognizing human dignity in all spaces, but that's my little take. Now for an expert, let's go to Israel.
Do you want to give us, correct him?
No, I think Krish has given us a very good understanding of decolonization and some of the triggers for a lot of people today. And I totally agree that it triggers a lot of people when you use that word. I've definitely had people who have come back to me and like, why are you using that word? So it causes a lot of unsettledness for people. But I think there's no way we can talk about decolonization without first of all talking about colonization. And I think for me that there are sort of three strands to this. There is history and colonization, there is language and colonization, and there is church and colonization. The history has to do with, of course, when European powers, as they start carving out the so-called New World, discovering, as it was used, new lands and new places, and setting out an outpost of empire in other people's lands. That's when sort of colonization was taking place. And let's not forget that colonization colonies, they were kind of like your first capitalist economic system that sort of fuel slavery or intersect with slavery around the same time. So there is that. But what I also did is that it created a kind of a language, enslaved masters, colonized, people who are colonizing, or sort of a language of developed world, underdeveloped, first world, third world. So we see that colonization has actually also shaped our language. And in terms of the church, it so happens that, particularly in the context of Africa, that colonization and the sort of European mission movement, the modern European mission movement, sort of intersect around the same time. Colonization in Africa started around, conversation started around 1840s, crystallized around the 1880s, but modern European mission in Africa started around the 1850s, so around the same time. So there is that intertwining of colonization and Christian expansion in the context of Africa. In Caribbean, slightly different. In Asia, slightly different. In North America, again, slightly different. But in the context of Africa, there was that scenario. And so today, when we talk about decolonization, you have to look at it first historically, the early efforts of, indigenous people to free themselves from colonial powers, whether to free their lands, but much more importantly, to free their minds. And Bob Marley will talk about emancipate yourself from mental slavery. That is a reference to freeing yourself from colonial thinking, because you can free your land, but your mind can still be colonized. That's the big problem that we're still fighting today, that when we talk about, decolonization, yes, some lands have been given back, some have not. We still now have colonial conservation going on around climate justice issues. But it's the mind, it's the mindset that we are dealing with. And how do we regain consciousness, which is even an interesting term in itself, which means colonization almost kills you. And so you need to regain consciousness by decolonizing, deconstructing yourself in order to be able to attain your humanity, your humanness, your being human in that sense. So that the process of decolonization is the resistance that people of color brings to regain their consciousness, to develop their own God-given agency and to develop their own humanity to flourish in today's context.
Thank you. Wow. So you've grown up in Nigeria, is that right?
Yeah, grew up in Nigeria.
So you've seen it from there, and then you've been here 20 years, and you've seen things. You've seen how the church is doing things here. What can you just briefly? What have you seen?
So let me start with your first sort of question. Growing up in Nigeria, so when people talk about colonization, decolonization, what's the fuss about? I hear that times in Christian circle. And I have to narrate my own experience. I grew up in Nigeria, so I didn't experience slavery. My context is like my ancestors did experience slavery, but the impact of colonization stays with me. So in my secondary school, primary school, the language of communicating was English. And I even remember in my primary school, if I were to speak my language, Yoruba, I would be condemned by my teachers. We were told, stop speaking in vernacular, which simply means stop speaking your language, because you were encouraged to speak English. And so English became the medium of communication at school. And even some parents would go as far as speaking English to their kids at home. The good thing was that my parents didn't do that. Hence, I can speak my language today. I know African parents who their children can't speak their language at all because they adopted the same at home. Now, that's one example of how colonization impacts. Now, living in the UK, and then when you are at the other end of that conversation, people saying, what's the fuss about? You're thinking about where you're coming from. And what is even interesting is that despite the fact that I was brought up in school with so-called proper English and so on, coming to the UK as a migrant, realized that English is different from Nigerian English. And what I mean by that is that the way we were even taught English and the way we use it is not sometimes even relevant in the UK context. And so you find yourself in this liminal space of thinking, all that colonial education, what actually has it done for me now that I'm living in the West, where it was supposed to prepare me for this international world? Actually, it's not relevant because other people say my accent is too strong, or the way I'm using certain words, that we don't use it that way, and then it becomes a problem. So being on both sides, you see the dilemma that sometimes people are in from the majority world, and it's a big problem.
Thank you. Wow. I mean, there's a lot to learn for us on this. Joy, when I first contacted you, which is about 18 months ago, you had some very strong thought through views about global development, and it really excited me actually to hear a church leader in the UK that had really thought through these things. And so, can you talk to me about some of those issues you had and why?
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, this is really fascinating, and I've learned loads just listening already. I don't know if my opinions about global development are really strong, or whether just my opinion of the gospel and what the gospel does is really strong. And I think I'd observed, I know you contacted me kind of about a World Vision project, and I just, as a church leader, get loads and loads of different organizations contacting, and so I just kind of fired back saying, sorry, we don't do sponsorship. And then you kind of pushed into like relationship, which I really valued. And then we've had some brilliant conversations, because for me, the gospel is about relationship. And I've thought about it loads more in our local context of mission than I have internationally. I'm not like brilliantly traveled. I don't like spend loads of time overseas. I've not spent a lot of time in local communities overseas hearing these stories, but I have spent loads of time in my own local community with local people and starting to understand the kind of definition that I used to use as poverty, and I think the church uses as poverty, or our kind of assumption that the gospel is just about the salvation of souls. And also, let's just like kind of in a more paternalistic rescuer kind of way, let's just give people stuff. And so as I've sat with friends who are experiencing material poverty, but then also that it's not just that they haven't got food in their cupboard, but it's that they have really low self-esteem, and they have a lack of purpose and their community relationships are broken down, started to really understand what it meant for the church when we were just chucking stuff at people and expecting, almost like it made us feel really good, like we were doing something to help something. And yeah, I just saw the lack of dignity in parents' eyes when we were giving them things to help their kids, but they weren't able to. They were able, if we were empowering them together, to help their own children. But as a church, we were just taking the like quick route of just, you know, just like this makes us feel better and we can tick a box. Really, I'm being quite crude about it. But I'd then like seen how then various different international partnerships that we'd had through our like missions program were doing really similar stuff, just building a well and then leaving, or, you know, and that's probably like some of the worst examples, but not really seeing the humanity or the dignity potential in individuals and in whole communities. And I think that some worst experience of seeing, the reason I came back really strong about sponsorship was I'd been in a kind of in an environment of a Christian festival where from the platform there was a like, would you like to sponsor this child? And kind of it just felt like lots of British kind of more affluent people were saying, yeah, I'll put the picture of a kid on my fridge and it'll make me, you know, I feel like I'm doing my bit. Where without really thinking, what does that feel like for the person who's on the receiving end of that? Just perpetuating our own I think someone said the word, talked about imposing, and rather than empowerment. And I just think it undermines our own discipleship. So it undermines my discipleship, as I think that I'm the rescuer to someone, whether they're in my local community or whether they're in Cambodia. And it undermines, it makes me feel like I take the Jesus role, I suppose. Instead of being his hands and feet, I am him, or I'm the like kind of, I'm the rescuer, which then just robs everyone else of their opportunity to kind of be empowered. So that was where some of my thinking had come from. It was really from local mission and just some friendships that I have with people who were in experiencing material poverty, but it just was so much more than just, it was a breakdown of all kinds of relationship and wanting to build relationship and not undermine that, if that makes sense.
That's so helpful, because I think that really sums up in a nutshell what church leaders are you know, trying to wrestle with, or we would like to see, or going to have to wrestle with, I think. And so that's really Dave, so you've been leading a church for a really long time, and you're on the board of World Vision, as you said, and so you must have gone through seeing a change in how you as a church have interacted with international mission and development. Can you talk us through some of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful, both all the contributions so far. And I think the first thing that's important is that particularly those of us who are from the West, or white, pale, male, like me, the first thing that we need to do is adopt this posture, which is firstly of listening, and of listening to people from around the world, and listening to particularly our sisters and brothers in the church around the world, and learning from them. So that's the first. It's a change in mindset, and I think Israel very powerfully, you know, portrayed the history of mission, and Edinburgh, where I'm speaking to you from, was the site of 1910 mission conference, you know, sending people across the world. There's a statue of Livingston half a mile from where I'm sitting, and Edinburgh in Scotland was a missionary nation. And this idea that we were going out to take the gospel to other people, but as Krish has said, that we weren't just taking the gospel, we were taking capitalism, we were taking imperialism. That shaped how we think about mission. The building that we occupy as a church was built in 1818, probably built with money from the slave trade, and we're coming to terms with that. But what I've seen over the 25, 27 years I've been at P's and G's, and then the last 15 or 20 years that I've been involved with World Vision is understanding that we need to do things differently. And one of the things that has encouraged me whenever I've been able to go to visit World Vision projects in Uganda or Tanzania or Kenya, or even last year in Romania, as World Vision were responding to the crisis of the conflict in Ukraine, was that it's a partnership. And it's a partnership where to use Israel's phrase, the indigenous World Vision staff members, they drive it. When World Vision goes into a community, it's for 15, 16 years, and they begin by saying to the people in that community, what do you think your needs are? So they don't impose, that's Joy's phrase, they don't impose a model. They don't think you need a well. They say to the community, what do you want? What do you need? And it's very much a model of empowering people. And over the last 3 or 4 years, we've reversed the idea of sponsorship. And the idea now is that rather than absolutely, I used to feel deeply uncomfortable with this, presented with this sea of photographs and choosing a child. Well, now through this thing called Chosen, we give the child the power to choose. And it was one of the most moving moments of my life to be in northern Uganda and see a child choose my 18-year-old daughter as her sponsor. I was in bits for the next 2 hours. But it's about empowering. And then as a World Vision board, together with World Vision staff, we're having to think through, well, how do we communicate about World Vision? So, we're getting rid of photographs with the white savior with a black child. And it's about pictures of the local community. It's about pictures of the national staff in Myanmar, in Kenya, in Brazil, and saying they are the ones who have the power. And I'll never forget one visit to Kenya, being as part of the induction, being told that when you're in the country, that the national staff in that country take priority. So you might be from the US, you might be from the UK, you might be from Australia, and you think that you're coming as the one with the power. And they said this, when you're in country, you defer to the national staff. And I went, yeah, that sounds good. But a World Vision US staff member was out, their Land Rover broke down, and the World Vision Kenya staff member said, so we stay now until help comes. And this guy was number 2 in World Vision in the States. So he was fairly senior. He'd worked for a mega church in the States. And he's also a marathon runner. And he said, well, it's only 5 miles away. I can jog back through the bush. And the World Vision Kenya staff member said, no, we stay until help comes. And again, Steve said, no, I can just jog through the bush. It's fine. And World Vision Kenya said, no, we stay. And Steve suddenly remembered, no, we defer to the people in the nation. And he said, yep, you're right, I defer. And he said, probably I would have got killed by a lion anyway if I'd run. But he said, I was completely in the wrong. So it's seeing it much more, as Joy was talking about, as a partnership, about giving people dignity, about giving people respect. But also, one of our church members is from Rwanda, and he just keeps on at me. And it's a tension, to go back to what Krish said, because he said, don't think about Africa as a continent, as a place that needs help. There are so many people in Africa who are entrepreneurs, who are incredibly creative. They've got, like everybody in the rest of the world. So think about Africa as you would about Europe or about North America, or think about it as a place that's this complete mixture, rather than just as a place that needs help. And as long as we don't export more trouser presses, I'd be very happy to do that.
That's brilliant. This is very unsatisfying, isn't it? Because it feels like we've just had an introduction to a conversation and we're actually out of time. But this is more people than we've had in a conversation before, so it's but it's just been so helpful. I feel like I've learned so much, and it might be good to have a part 2 of this at some point if you'd all be up for it. But really, it's just raised a load of questions, which is what I'd hoped for, and for people to be able to go and take this away and go and think about the stuff that's been said. Really want to thank you all for your time. And I'm sorry that it's so dissatisfying. We have to stop it now when you've all only had one chance to talk. But really want to thank you for your time, and let's keep talking about this. Thank you all so much.